Welcome to Rates and Barrels, presented by E-Trade from Morgan Stanley. It is Tuesday, July 22nd. Derek VanRiper, Sarris, Britt, Ghiroli here. It is a 3-0 show reunion today. 3-0 show assemble. Find the nearest conch. Let out a hearty blast, I think is the correct thing to say. I didn't think that one through. I just walked right into that one. On this episode, we are going to discuss the Dodgers and try to figure out what they should actually be worried about as the trade deadline approaches next week. We're going to dig into the FanGraphs crowdsourced trade value tool. Eno and I spent some time clicking away in there, and we got some different lists. I'm a little surprised by some of the names that popped up on there. We'll talk about things we've noticed playing with that, seeing some of those lists floating around online. And we're going to dig into the Blue Jays a little bit later on in the show. If we buy them to win the AL East, to be a dangerous club in October, maybe talk about a few things they could do between now and the trade deadline to enhance their profile atop the AL East. So, a lot of ground to cover and some news right off the top pertaining to the Dodgers. It appears that Tanner Scott is likely headed to the IL after feeling a sting in his forearm Monday night. This according to Fabian Ardaya of The Athletic. Tanner Scott is the least of the Dodgers' problems, you guys, but I think when I look at this team, the thing that jumps off the page is run prevention is not elite. And it's because they've had a ton of injuries on the pitching side. It's easy to understand where it breaks down, right? They're on pace to allow something like 751 runs this season. And they almost certainly will not allow 751 runs this season. So this is where I'm trying to talk everyone down from the worrying about the pitching, because you got Blake Snell coming back, 58 pitches at AAA on Sunday. Ohtani's up to 3 innings now in his starts. He continues to stretch out slowly. He started Monday night, threw 46 pitches and homered. Tyler Glasnow is back from the IL, has looked great in his first 2 starts back. Best model numbers we've seen yet. So the stuff appears to be back in the pre-2025 Glasnow levels. So 3 really important starters are going to log a lot more innings for them going forward than they have thus far. So I'm not going to worry about the starting pitching. That was sort of built the way it was built, and it looks like it's going to come back at about the right time. My concern is Mookie Betts. I'm worried about Mookie Betts. Still has a great eye, playing good defense at short, but he's just not the same hitter, you guys. Like the virus that caused him to drop at 20 pounds back at the start of the season, I think at the time, you said it's very hard to regain weight, to put weight back on during the season. And I think we're seeing that play out just in the quality of contact. It is just not there for Mookie this season, and it seems very unlikely that he's going to get that aspect of his game back in the final 2+ months of the season. So it's not a he has to be replaced sort of problem. It's a we have to think about how our lineup is built kind of problem, where Mookie's not the guy you're used to him being. So where do you start to tinker? Where do you start to actually make this roster better as you try to get that back-to-back World Series championship?
I mean, in my mind, there's only so much you can do at the trade deadline, right? You're not going to find a Mookie Betts out there. So I think for the Dodgers, what you're going to have to do is address, like you said, some of the run prevention, which is going to be bullpen help. And I think Arkin Rosenthal, recently reported that they're looking into bullpen help, which is fairly obvious because they need bullpen help. It seems to be the easiest way to upgrade in terms of even teams that are bad usually have 1 or 2 relievers that are good at the trade deadline. Andrew Friedman is very well known for not liking to overpay at the deadline. So it is going to be interesting for him to thread the needle. The reason they went out and made all these moves and spent, billions of dollars the last couple of winters is so they wouldn't have to do this in July. But similar to, last year, and similar to almost, it feels like every year, the Dodgers have a pitching injury problem, especially when it comes to relief. Tanner Scott, as you mentioned, the latest issue. He also wasn't good before this. He was really struggling performance-wise. So I think they're going to have to go out, get a couple relievers, hope that does enough. You mentioned Mookie, and yeah, in this situation, you almost need an offseason to kind of put the weight and the muscle and all that back on. I think you would still take him over, an average big league player. There is some hope that, maybe they get him some rest down the stretch. Maybe he finds a way to kind of get back, not all the way, but to kind of doing Mookie Betts-ish things at the plate. They've said that they won't change where he is. At least Dave Roberts has said for now, they're not going to change where he bats in the lineup. So to me, the best, easiest way to upgrade is to go out and get a couple arms and hope that that's enough to keep some distance between you and the Padres for the NL West.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the big number for me is 446 and 2/3 innings from the bullpen. Uh, that's unsustainable. That's number one in baseball by 40 innings already. And it's put such a tax, I think, on the bullpen that we now see, Tanner Scott, Michael Kopech. Kopech is an oft injured guy himself. But you built this on, this bullpen on, to some extent, free agents and veterans. So when you have Kirby Yates and Michael Kopech and Tanner Scott going into the season, I guess it's not too surprising that you end up with injuries at some point decimating your bullpen. I think that it is the easiest place to improve in the trade deadline, and I think that they wanted to. They've said this publicly that they wanted to build a team where they weren't desperate for anything, and so nobody knew what their needs were, and nobody could kind of be like, "Oh, you want Ryan Helsley? You got to pay up." But they're now in that position where I think everybody knows they want bullpen help, and there's no avoiding that. As for Mookie Betts, I don't know. I decided I would go back and just look at a rolling exit velocity chart, and here it is. And so obviously a couple of things come to mind, which is, well, this year's exit velocities are way worse than the rest, especially when you go back. This is going back to 2021. So 2023, he looked pretty good. The other three seasons, though, 2023 looks like the outlier. The other three seasons, he kind of oscillates around 90 miles an hour. And that's actually where his rolling exit velocity is right now. So I think there is, an early season dip this year, which is probably due to the sickness. I don't know what that next dip is, but he's had other dips in the past. This one was just worse, probably because he was starting from a worse standpoint. But right now, his rolling exit velocity looks a little bit like it did in the second half last year. I looked at the second half last year. He hit 263, 314 with 497 slugging. So I actually think he can pull himself out of this. I think what I've seen from him recently is he has such a good ability to make contact. He's been making contact on pitches outside the zone. I think he's pressing. And, in the stories that I've read, he's, they've talked about how he'll swing, till his hands are raw. I think that was in a Fabian story. He presses like anybody else, and I think what he needs to do is really zone up and have a tighter approach where he's just looking for certain pitches. If he sees a couple called strike threes, whatever it is, but just zoom in on some pitches he can actually do some damage on, find that damage swing again. I actually think it's back in there. I think he will be okay. And the fact that he makes so much contact is just more and more chances for him to kind of figure it out. If you're just swinging and missing at everything, then you just don't have a chance to figure it out, I think. So I actually think Mookie Betts will be okay. I think this team is really, really good. And once the starting rotation comes back online, do you guys remember at all last year, there was a period where people thought the Dodgers were going to be out in the first round?
Oh, I mean, they were facing elimination at the hands of the Padres.
To be fair,
I remember that.
Yeah, exactly. That wasn't that crazy of a concept.
Right. But I was talking to other writers that weren't even sure they would make the playoffs at one point. So
okay, that's a little crazy. Yeah. But they were on the brink. I thought for sure they were goners. And many people who are listening to the same podcast probably did as well. It looked like the Padres had all that momentum.
Yeah.
So
I think that they'll find the 3 or 4 starting pitchers that they need in the postseason. And they'll find the 3 or 4 bullpen arms that they need, and they'll be a force to be determined with. I mean, they still have so many good players. Now, if we look forward from here, I do think it's interesting that you build these teams in free agency, you do start to have a group of guys that can start to look old quickly, and I do wonder what do you think of the Dodgers in 2027? It's Freeman, near the end of that contract. If Betts doesn't really get it back together again, Tommy Edman, by the way, came to the Dodgers, had a power explosion that made us think, okay, maybe they've unlocked something in his swing and he's a different player. and then has just basically receded to where he was with the Cardinals since. And they've locked him into a long tail. They are not immune to bad deals. I think the last Chris Taylor deal was a bad deal. They've done some bad deals, and if you do a couple bad deals at the wrong time, like it can lock you into place with an old squad. So, a lot sort of depends on guys like Andy Pages, like actually being really good.
And Andy Pages appears to be really good.
Yeah.
I mean, he's 22% better than league average so far. He's popped 18 homers this year. Plays good defense in the outfield, like more in the corner than in center field. But hey, like he's a good player. Will Smith continues to be an underrated top end bat. He's actually been their best hitter by WRC+. You got Shohei. You're going to get Max Muncy back. Max Muncy, since getting his vision corrected, is back to being Max Muncy again. So once he's off the IL, he's an impact bat. You still have Freddie, healthy enough to be as good as he's been so far. I mean, it's still a lineup that with the struggles of Mookie Betts, Teoscar Hernandez not being as good as we'd hoped, and Michael Conforto being, frankly, just kind of brutal. A 282 WOBA, a 79 WRC+. Despite all that, they're third in WRC+ as a team. They're third in WOBA. Their offense is fine. They're going to score plenty of runs. There's no question about that. And needing a corner outfield upgrade at the deadline, it's like the easiest thing to have to go out and get via trade. Costs you almost nothing. Plenty of teams have one to spare. So there's still not that much to worry about with this team, even though it's been a rough stretch. To me, this is the symptom of a long season. Every team at some point goes through a stretch, 2 or 3 weeks, where it's just not working. They get swept a couple of times. Slumps happen, like just all the things that make you question who you are or make your fans question who you are in most cases. Everyone's gone through it. We've gone through it with the Mets. We've gone through it with the Phillies. We're probably going through it with the Yankees right now. We'll save that for a different day. It happens to everybody. So no need to panic.
The cyclical thing is funny because last night there was a huge deal being made on social media about the Brewers having the best record in baseball. And, listen, maybe I got it wrong. There's been a lot of times when the Brewers have surprised me. But I also just don't think that they are the best team in baseball. And I think that's a little stretch. So I think that like they're in their good stretch and some other teams are in their bad stretches. And it surprised me over and over again how we get so myopic about like, oh, this is what's going on. This is what's going on in the middle of the Brewers like amazing winning streak where they've lost 5 games in the last, 30 games or something. Like that's the Brewers, and then like 2 weeks from now, we're going to be like, they can't score.
True. But I do think they're a very good team, though. Like the Tigers are a very good team. Like these teams that have toggled back and forth for best like records in baseball, and to go 6-0 like the Brewers have against the Dodgers, pretty impressive, right? I am curious.
That's like the two narratives coming together.
Yes, exactly. I was wondering if Derek was talking up the Dodgers a lot because his Brewers are 6-0 against them. It's a little stronger. I don't know.
It's just 6 games in the middle of the season. It's fun, but it doesn't. They're just 6 wins. But
right now is an interesting time because if your team plays really well, it may make ownership a little more apt to open up the checkbook, right? Like a hot time in July is a little bit different than a hot time in April and then your slide in July, right? Especially, and the Brewers and Dodgers aren't in this boat, but for fringy teams that are trying to figure out their own fate, this is kind of a good time to be playing meaningful baseball if you want to convince the front office to invest in your team. So I agree with you, both of you guys, that it is a long season and there's going to be good and bad stretches, but the timing of those stretches does matter, I think, to a certain extent.
Yeah. Okay. So staying on topic, I think when we were talking about some teams that were struggling, no, I'm agreeing with you. I'm staying with you. The May struggles of the Brewers had people like me sitting here going, maybe this is finally the year where cutting it thinner and trading down is finally caught up to them. I started to wonder if that was a thing. Just like last year, we started to wonder, okay, maybe the Astros in May, maybe the Astros aren't the Astros anymore. And wait, look how the rest of the season played out. So it's just at any point in time, it's so easy to take a snapshot of a team and think it's much worse than it really is or much better than it really is. And that's why the season's 162 games. It's almost difficult to stay appropriately grounded in what a team really is because of the way it plays out over such a long period of time.
Yeah, I think that there's, but what she was just saying, like what Britt was just saying about, the timing is so important. Like Milwaukee had that first 3 games, they had the worst beginning of a season by run differential ever or something. Like,
torpedo bats were destroying everybody. Like, remember the first weekend of the season? It's easy to forget stuff.
They had a minus 32 coming out in run differential coming out. So like, I think that colored what we thought of them for a long time. But then, what Britt's saying also, like, now we have the trade deadline coming, and, when you're in St. Louis and you are above 500 and you're in the wild card race, I think most St. Louis fans would have taken that at the beginning of the season. However, when you are 10-14 in the last 30 days going into the trade deadline, that's not as exciting, and you've basically, we had these graphs over at FanGraphs where you can see the playoff probabilities of each of the teams in graph format. And if you do the NL Central, it's Milwaukee kind of starting really low and then just rising to meet the Cubs, where they're now equals in terms of playoff odds. And it's St. Louis kind of bumbling along, but in a trough where they were near 50% playoff probability at the beginning of July, and now they're at 21%. So, that speaks a lot to what they're going to do, and the timing of it going right into the deadline we're human beings, like we may color what they're thinking in St. Louis. And I think Ryan Helsley would be the best reliever on the market if they made him available. And it's kind of, you're just kind of looking their direction and wondering what they'll do. And, I think on a certain level, I kept waiting for the Twins, to do something, and they've only gone down. And so when we just did a piece about, the best names available, the Twins coming online would put Joe Ryan, who was our number 1 trade, candidate, if he is actually available, Duran, Griffin Jacks. Like, they do have a lot of pieces that if they decided to sell, they could make some noise. But you kind of you wonder what the execs, how sober the execs are thinking about it. Like, are they affected by the last 30 days? Are they looking at these odds, in this graph format? Or are they saying, hey, no, we still have a 22% chance of making the playoffs. This is good. We're going to keep the team together.
See, I think my impression of the execs is they have a pretty grounded understanding of the value each game. But I think at the ownership level, that's where you get people to be a little more excited. I think that timing matters, as Britt said. I think the Guardians are the team coming out of the break where I'm like, hey, this is a team that plays in the middle all the time. If they're playing well, they're buyers. If they're not playing well, they're probably going to be sellers. And they're playing well enough where maybe they're nudging their fate into that buyer category. So I do think the timing thing is real. And one other point on timing and recent performances, the Giants are 11-19 in their last 30. They've lost 6 in a row. The Giants fans in my timeline, if I didn't know anything about the Giants, if I just woke up last night, looked at my timeline, and had to guess the Giants record based on the way people are reacting to every individual game, I would give them like 35 wins. Be like, oh yeah, they're about a 35 win team based on the reaction. People are so furious with that Giants team right now because
with AI, we might be able to do something like this.
Yeah.
Ask AI to use social media to estimate team win totals.
Maybe we can do it without AI.
I bet you the Yankees total would be way lower than the Yankees total.
Yeah.
Almost every team, though, would be lower. Fans complain.
True. But I think the magnitude of the complaints, and especially if you correct for volume of fans, right? I mean, like there are more Yankees fans than there are Rockies fans. So like you have to appropriately account for that. But yeah, like it's just one of those things. And like, a 6-game losing streak is rough. Like those are not fun. I was not a happy camper when the season started. It didn't go well for my team right out of the chute. Like it's human nature, as we've said many times. Let's flip it to the top of the AL East then. I think it makes sense to just look at something that's going really right. The Blue Jays are one of those teams that's playing very well lately. They're 21-9 in their last 30. They're atop the AL East. They have a 4-game lead over the Yankees. They swept the Yankees in their series earlier this year. They're in the middle of a series with them right now. I look at this Jays team and I see a team that's a little bit different in terms of how it's built, but also like capable of being very good. It's just more of a question of, I'm not sure if the Blue Jays have the prospects to go out and go get the best of the best players available at the deadline. I'm not sure if they're willing to move. Like Arjun Nimal is probably their best prospect by a mile. I don't know if they would actually trade him to change their fate for this year and maybe beyond, depending on who's out there. But the bigger question is, do you buy into them as like an AL East winner this year? Do you think they can actually pull this off? Do you think they're a dangerous playoff team if they make the right kinds of moves? I mean, Britt, what's your assessment of the Blue Jays up to this point in the season?
So, do I think they can win the AL East? Yes. But that's more an indictment of the AL East, I think. I don't know if I'd call them a dangerous playoff team yet. I think the jury's still out. I'd love to know. We know that this is a ownership group that has missed out on stars, right? And has wanted to get stars to come to Toronto. I'm going to assume that there's a budget for them to make moves at the deadline. We've kind of talked about this trade deadline may not be a huge splashy deadline, but I think if you're Toronto and you can find a way to make a quote unquote splash or get a big name player, they're missing Anthony Santander, has been out for quite a while, so you could try to replace that offense. I think you look at the rest of this AL East, and the Yankees have had some serious struggles, and we've talked about that. I'm sure we'll get into that in various parts. The Orioles have vastly underperformed that they are going to be sellers at this deadline, right? The Red Sox have had one of the most confounding seasons. It looks like they go through stretches where they look like they're never going to win again, and then they go through stretches where they look like they're never going to lose again. And we talked about baseball being streaky, but to me, they're one of the most streaky teams in baseball. They, of course, traded away Rafael Devers, so I'm not really certain what's going on there. Tampa Bay is kind of pesky, but on the fence, right? And, we're not really sure if they're in the buyer or seller category. So if you're Toronto and you're a front office that, let's be honest, we all thought was on the hot seat this winter, why wouldn't you go all in at this deadline? Say, you know what, this is kind of a down year for this division. There's no super team in this AL East. This is our time. Like, we could actually change the narrative, because it looked like they were a organization that really just needed to blow up the top and start over. They've really had some good performances as a team. It's not one guy who's overperforming. Vlad's had some big hits for them. Kevin Gossman has been excellent. He had another gem, I think it was last night. So, I think if I'm Toronto, I'm looking at it as we could win the AL East. This is not a dominant division like it has been in years past. How do we get there? I wouldn't call them a dangerous playoff team. I think they probably need another starter, like a real starter, not like let's add a fifth starter and some depth. I think they need someone up front with Gossman that scares you, so they can win a playoff series. But I also wouldn't count them out, because I think they have the resources, they have the hunger, they have a fan base that's clamoring for the Toronto to be good again and to go back to, the times that they were a dominant team, like, in the 90s and such. So I think that they're a really interesting case, because a lot of people didn't see them coming, myself included, and there is a lane for them to continue what they're doing. I know, Derek, you had some stat about how they are very lucky. I don't see it as they're playing totally over their skis. I think a lot of things is going right for them right now. As we talked about, there's going to be ebbs and flows of the season. But to me, playing at a high level and winning against these divisional opponents like the Yankees is something they could definitely do. And I think it's something that can be sustained. The question is, what are they going to do to make this team better? Because when you're a team like this and you're in that clubhouse, and I've been on, or not been on those teams, but I've been in those clubhouses, right? 15 years on a beat. If you're a team that's kind of like this and the front office goes out and they get you 2 or 3 names, it just totally is a shot in the vein to all these guys, right? If you go out and you add like one bullpen guy and you half sell, half buy, that's a real good way to tank morale in there. So I think this deadline for them is maybe more important than most of the clubs in MLB, because of where they're at, because of their past, their struggle to get the big stars. They finally agree to a deal with Vlad. Now they're playing like this. To me, this is how you win back a fan base. This is how you ensure that you are going to win the AL East, by being very aggressive at the deadline. I don't know if that's in this front office, but I'd love to see it.
I mean, I think the thing about the
Seattle,
Jays that
are you
it's caught
listening?
yeah, Seattle. Come on, Seattle.
No, I just mean
Seattle.
that whole like Paul Sewald trade where everyone was just like, why did we just trade our closer?
Yes.
Yeah, trading your
Yes.
closer while staying in it, I can vouch for that. It doesn't always go well in the clubhouse. Like, it seems like a move
Torpedoes.
that players get a little upset about. The luck stat was from a Neil Payne article on The Athletic, and it was looking at a combination of winning more than expected based on run differential and scoring more or allowing fewer runs than expected based on overall stats. So there's like a timing component and a close game component to it. And by that, they were the luckiest team. Wins of luck, according to Neil's calculations, were just over 6. The Blue Jays, the Orioles, the Angels, the Dodgers, and the Guardians are the 5 luckiest teams. The Brewers right there at 6.
Ooh. And we saw the Guardians run differential kind of predicted a little bit of the slide they've been in. I was going to say, yeah, the luck is not necessarily when I look at Bichette or Vlad or Springer. There's a little bit of luck component there with the fact that he's 35 and, this might be one of his last great years, but they've got it. It is happening. I wouldn't say that's luck. It's just sort of a luck of timing. Last year was terrible. That happens near the end of your career. So, I think that the main guys are pretty good. The luck that I see is when Nathan Lukes has a 111 WRC plus, Tyler Heineman has a 155 WRC plus, David Schneider has a 124, Joey Loperfido has a 143. Like all of their role players that they bring into the game just seem to be performing at the top end, and that's great because as you get healthy or as you don't have to rely on them as much, and you rely on your stars, you get Jimenez back and he gets back on track, whatever it is. You don't have to rely on those role players anymore. So yeah, you bank that luck to some extent and you say, with a sober look at this team, how good is it? It's a pretty good team. There's no stat that says that their starting rotation is above average. I looked through every stat, K-BB stuff, and in fact, there are a lot of stats that say this rotation is one of the worst 5 in baseball. And maybe those are too aggressive.
I feel like this is just like a middle third rotation. Like it's a pretty close to average, maybe a shade
among
below.
Contenders, if you're a middle third rotation, then you start to look like a bad one among contenders. So I really agree with Britt that like this is a team that they could go out and get a 5th starter and say, hey, this is better than the Bowden Francis, Eric Lauer, whatever, back end situation we've been undergoing. And that would be helpful. But man, if they could get, like why not get like an Edward Cabrera, somebody who has just like nasty stuff that you feel like could really come in and even dominate against a great team. And you think he's turned the corner with his new changes. And you have him under command for, other team years. And how do you trade for him? I think you trade off the major league roster. All those names that I just said that are overperforming, somebody may like them, and they've shown the ability to at least play at the major league level. Maybe you can convince somebody, hey, these are guys with team control. You need a Davis Schneider to, hit you a bunch of homers from second base, whatever it is. Like, I think you trade off the major league roster and you say, we're going to bank some of that luck and we're going to trade one of these major league sort of back end pieces for us for a starting pitcher. And I think you try to aim high. If it's Sandy Alcantara because his value is a little bit lower right now because he's struggling, I still take that. That's a guy who can start a playoff game for me. If there's some weird game you can play with AJ Preller where you pry Dylan Cease loose for something, I don't know how the Padres trade Dylan Cease and get better. But they're, if Joe Ryan is on the market, like you gotta be aggressive wherever that is. If Nathan Eovaldi like could be possibly on the market, and we've talked about Jake DeGrom many times, so the names that they don't seem available. There's always like one player that you were like you're a little surprised, like Isaac Paredes last year.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't think he was like available. It was the Rays, so they could do anything. Could the Rays trade a pitcher? Taj Bradley is in our trade value series. Like, would you want Taj Bradley? That's a little bit. There's a line there. He's like maybe a 3rd starter. But that's that. I would want to try and get an impact starter. That's what I would want to do.
So there's a little bit of a similarity in terms of how the pitching is built for me to last year's Guardians team. The Jays bullpen's not as dominant as the Guardians bullpen was during the regular season, but it's third best by Sierra. It's second in K-minus BB percentage. Like, the Jays have a good bullpen, and it's a deep bullpen too. They took their biggest weakness on the roster and kind of flipped it in one off season, which is pretty impressive. Is the bullpen good enough for them to shorten up games with their starters and just lean on their fifth and sixth reliever in the playoffs, like to push more innings on guys like that if they can't go out and get the impact starter they want? Do you think the bullpen is that good? Do you have enough quality and enough depth to pull that off?
That's a dangerous game to play to me. Go ahead,
Teams play it, though. Sometimes it works.
We saw the Tigers with I would say, a worse bullpen pull that same feat. And, last year. And I think Braden Fisher, Brendan Little have been really revelations for them. So you've got, I think Hoffman is better than his ERA indicates right now. He's been a little bit unlucky with the homers, I think. And so, I just named, I think, 4 guys that I trust. Yariel Rodriguez has been, been really great. I don't know how much I trust him, but now we're already at 5. So, that's a pretty good group there. They could add somebody that was not a closer, sort of like just another arm if they wanted to stay fresh there. But I trust that bullpen, actually.
I trust the bullpen. I don't know. Like, Detroit made it work because they had Skubal and pitching chaos, right? How many teams have Skubal? So yeah, I like Gausman. It's not a apples to apples comparison here, right? So I think AJ Hinch does a better job managing those tiny little moves. That's the other way they use their bench. They're still like this. The way they maximize each guy. I think he does a better job of that than most MLB managers. I don't know if John Schneider would be as good at the pitching chaos part of it. I think you have to have a certain, I don't want to say feel, but just the way that Hinch managed that team. I think he gets the maximum out of his team. I think he's probably one of the better managers in baseball. And this is not a slight to Snyder at all. I just don't know if that's something that you want to be replicating. It's also a case where if you go to the playoffs and you get a short start from Gausman, then you're really screwed, right? So I would love to see the Blue Jays just go out and get another starter and have the lockdown bullpen. Then they actually are a dangerous playoff team, right? They add one legit starter, some of the names mentioned, and you look at that relief group, and all of a sudden you're like, they definitely could win a playoff series because Vlad hasn't been Vlad as of late either, and they're still winning games. So there are ways for them to get better. Santander can come back at some point in time. They could add another bat. They could be dangerous. I'm not going to put them in the dangerous playoff team category right now, but it's like right there for them. And if they decide they're going to go like the Cleveland route, when they have this money and they have this ownership that wants to win and they have a pretty rabid fan base, I think it would be disappointing.
So I think they're going to do stuff. They're going to add payroll. Like, that'd be very surprising if they didn't. But I think, the way this team's built, people are skeptical, similar to the way they were skeptical of the Tigers. The timeline for the Tigers was different because they did so much after selling at the trade deadline, took single-digit playoff odds, turned that into a postseason berth. We didn't believe in the Tigers a week before the playoffs started on this show. Like, I'll admit it. It's one of the best mistakes, but like the biggest mistakes I've made on this show in 7 years was being very, very slow to buy into the 2024 Tigers. I don't think I was the only one, but nevertheless, I think that skepticism's there with the Jays too.
A side benefit for the Jays for getting a top end starter, if you think about even the rest of season, but also playoffs, is you turn, I think, Max Scherzer and Eric Lauer into long relievers, and you help your pen that way. I know that saying that about Max Scherzer feels weird. But we aren't talking about mid-career Max Scherzer. So, this might be the perfect way for him to come in for 2 or 3 innings and be more dominant than asking him to kind of extend that out to 5 and 6 innings. And then you have a short start from Gausman. Hey, it's Max Scherzer coming in, right? So I think that, the starting rotation addition also helps their bullpen. In terms of, getting a lot out of role players, though, I will have to say that, they seem to be doing really well with the mix and match with their with the Heineman, Schneider, Loperfido types. And in particular, like their use of Ernie Clement, who is a limited player. I think he's been the glue for that team. Ernie Clement and Miles Straw have really been really important for that team, just because their defensive ability, paired with Ernie Clement's just ability to put the ball in play all the time, has allowed them to kind of move guys around the field and do a lot of interesting things. I've seen Straw come in as a defensive replacement a lot. Like he'll come in as a pinch runner and then go into center field. And that's like kind of a cool thing to have in the 9th inning or the 8th inning. Your slugger type gets on base and, listen, Miles Straw is going to run for you, and then he's going to play center field, So I've seen them make that move a lot. So it's a pretty good team on the offensive side in terms of, defense and offense. And so I'd focus on the rotation.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the StatCast fielding run value, the Jays number 1 by a healthy margin, 34 in that category. The Cubs and Brewers are second and third at 23 and 21. Actually, the Cardinals also at 21 in that category. Outs above average, Jays are pretty good there, 14. That gives them a rank of 7 league-wide. And then defensive runs saved, they are tied for 7th with Boston at a plus 30. So the way that team is built, the pieces fit together well. I think it's actually a well-constructed roster that wasn't necessarily appreciated at the outset of the season for what it could do, but their needs.
I think we were focused on Springer's toast, and and what's Vladdy going to give you, and is Bo Bichette, broken, and Springer coming back and Boba coming back was that was always a possibility that this is a pretty good core still.
I think that's a good way to look at them right now. So I think, yes, we do buy them as a legit contenders, at least, to win the AL East. That's very much in play. And they make the right moves, maybe they're going to be even more dangerous in the postseason. All right, let's talk about the FanGraphs crowdsourced trade value tool. This was a request in our Discord for us to click around in there, and it's interesting. So the way it works is you're presented with 2 players side by side, 2 cards, and you're supposed to do as many as 100, 150 matchups just to get a good feel for the system to spit out true value scores, right? So it just gives you 2 players and you decide which one you think is more valuable based on all the basic criteria: current performance, future performance. I think there's
contract's
part of it too. So then you're thinking about, a no service time player versus a long-term deal guy like Ohtani or Soto or Judge. And that gets really hard. I found that to be the most difficult pairing, is when you'd get a superstar today on a massive contract put up against a limited service time player, and you'd say, okay, what do I want? I want Shohei Ohtani
against Jordan Lawler was one of mine.
So you click through these over and over and over again. It keeps track of how many you do, and it generates your list of top 10 trade value players. If you're watching us on YouTube, Eno's is the white list on the left. I use dark mode, so I got the list that's in black on the right. We came to this. Our clicking came to the one agreement at the top of the list that Shohei Ohtani is the player in the league with the most trade value. Stunning, amazing, right? Who would have thought that would have turned out that way? What I think is interesting, though, about Ohtani specifically, I think, and I was telling Britt about this before the show, I was trying to float this as my theory. I think every single team in the league, if it had the opportunity to trade for Shohei Ohtani in a world where this is somehow going to happen, every single team would do it, even with the contract, because they know that the actual value goes well beyond WAR in Shohei Ohtani's case, because he's a global star, right? You'd happily take the amazing player and get all of that marketing, air quotes, value along with it. And I don't know if there's any other player on a massive contract, maybe Aaron Judge. You could look at Judge and say, okay, yeah, same thing with Judge. I think his star globally is not the same as Ohtani's. Soto is a guy that I had a hard time with in this exercise, because I'm like, if I start thinking about the number of teams that could actually trade for him, that's a much shorter list. There's only a half dozen teams maybe in the league that would be eager to trade for Juan Soto with that contract, even though he's a superstar, one of the very best players in the game. So I did find some of the contract considerations to be very, very challenging when faced with choices between James Wood versus a high price superstar, or Roman Anthony popped on my list. Roman Anthony came up 10th on my list, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly how that happened. So
you had James Wood halfway up on your list, and I was like, I like James Wood. And I think I clicked on James Wood every time I had a choice of, so I was like, but I do remember there was one choice. It was James Wood against Elly De La Cruz. And I clicked Elly De La Cruz partially just because I think they're very similar players, but Elly plays shortstop. I mean, that's what I got to, Yep. I was like, I'd rather have the shortstop, I think. And James Wood is not on my top 10. and he was for most of the time. I also say that it's really important to get past 100 and 150 because there was a moment in the 90s and 100s where I was like, this list is trash. Like, I don't understand how this list came about. And then it started to be good. But yeah, Logan Webb, a veteran, top of his game starter with like 3 years of team control on like a decent contract. That's how he got in there. Cal Raleigh, I did find like my own biases came into place, which is that, I do think that sometimes people value the unproven, team control, league minimum, Jordan Lawler types, over guys who are, on a contract for a long time. If that contract is a good contract, then I'm going to take him. So Cal Raleigh is on a long-term contract, and I think it's a decent contract. So Cal Raleigh's in my top 10. Ketel Marte is actually, I think, underpaid, considering how good he is. So, that's why you don't have too many young players, but the young players that I do have established themselves, I think, in Jackson Chourio, Jackson Merrill, Elly De La Cruz. They've established themselves. Otherwise, my list is pretty much a veteran list. You thought that there was maybe a Gunnar Henderson moment where you're like, I mostly picked Gunnar Henderson, but there was a moment I picked one guy over him and he kind of disappeared.
Yeah, I think the toss-up I had was Skeens versus Henderson. And I like Skeens a lot. I think developing and finding top-of-the-league aces is really difficult. And I think the benefit of having those guys without having to give them, Max Fried, Garrett Crochet type extensions is huge. It's just an amount of surplus value that's very hard to match. So I guess I wasn't surprised that Skeens ended up second on my list, but I was a little surprised that it eventually kind of just pushed Gunnar Henderson off the top 10 completely. Because I think if you're going through the process of building these lists, like Eno's list, if you're not watching on YouTube, Ohtani, Gunnar Henderson, Aaron Judge, top 3, Acuna, Elly De La Cruz, Cal Raleigh, Logan Webb, Ketel Marte, Jackson Chourio, and Jackson Merrill rounding out his top 10. My list came out Ohtani, Skeens, Judge, James Wood, Junior Caminero, Juan Soto, Elly De La Cruz, Jackson Chourio, Yordan Alvarez, and then Roman Anthony. I know if we went through this exercise without the use of the tool, our 10s would be different. We would not have the same 10 if we had just gone through, looked at a bunch of contracts, spent 4 hours digging through spreadsheets, thinking through the exercise. It just turned out this way because of the formatting. I wonder which is actually more accurate.
The better way to do it.
Which is the better way to do it? Which
there's
one
something
actually
nice about you just click and you get into a groove and you're just like you're not thinking too hard. And
right? Yeah.
There's something actually kind of cool about that. Where you're just like bop,
Yeah.
bop, 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 bop. There's something that might actually access a better evaluation than really sitting down with it. Because I mean, I'm not surprised I don't have many pitchers, and the pitcher I do have is kind of boring in some way, Logan Webb. But I just feel like good contract, shown the ability to be healthy. I wasn't going to put Garrett Crochet in my top 10, I don't think. And Max Fried kept popping up, and and then there's Spencer Schwellenbach where you're like, yeah, but it already had TJ, and like, I just couldn't. I argued myself out of almost every pitcher.
Okay. The fun part of this exercise is a bunch of these guys won't get traded, so you can't even really expend a lot of energy thinking about what the trade would look like. I mean, Tarek Skubal isn't on either one of our lists. It seems like if we were making these lists manually, he might be still under control for one more season after this year. Tigers have
it's
obviously
a short
no reason
amount
to
of
trade
control compared to the other guys at the top of this list.
Right. So then when you're going through the exercise, you just assume, I'm going to lose him in free agency.
Who's the highest guy that would actually get traded? Who do you think is the best player that would actually get traded? Ketel Marte?
Maybe Marte?
Not impossible.
If you blew them away?
Alvarez?
Yeah, would the Astros trade Yordan Alvarez this winter? I mean,
I don't know. I'm just trying to think of guys who like are not total. The rest of these guys are like untouchable. It feels like.
I don't think anybody on either one of our lists would get traded in the next 18 months. Like I can't really come up with a good reason, barring information we do not currently know about these guys that would lead their teams to trade them.
I just mean theoretically, I bet you get to like 30 before you're like, okay, this guy could get traded.
I want the longer version of the list. Yeah.
Yeah, like James Wood could be traded, but if you're the Nats, you can't trade him now. And
you're not trading him now.
Is he part of the next good Nationals team? Maybe not. But they're more apt to trade Gore, who's at the same point in time that Soto was when they dealt him, right? So I don't know. I thought your list would be more similar, guys.
And it's weird because it's I imagine it gives everybody different combinations in different orders and everything too. So it's not like we looked at the same first 150 1v1s either. So that's, I think, I barely remember seeing Logan Webb in toss-ups at all. I think I saw him maybe once or twice. So I
think even theoretically 30. So when they did their trade value at the beginning of the season, their 30 was Ketel Marte, Adley Rutschman, William Contreras, Brian Wu. I'm saying nope, not trading. Mizorowski not trading. Logan Gilbert, Yamamoto not trading. Wheeler 41. Byron Buxton. Now I think we're talking a little bit.
It's got a no trade clause. Doesn't want to go. Wants to stay in Minnesota.
You wouldn't trade Adley Rutschman?
Baldwin?
Would you listen?
Adley Rutschman. Yeah. Okay, maybe. I think only
so.
2 more years.
I think you would too.
I think you would, because you got Samuel Basayo coming up in the organization too. Like, one of your best prospects is a catcher. He's near big league ready. And if that is your path to upgrading your roster, getting the impact pitcher you need, consider, I mean, Adley's a little older for a guy you'd give a big extension to as well. So you have to consider that. And it's not like you're excited to do it.
50. We just got to 50 on the FanGraphs list, and we've got Adley Rutschman and Byron Buxton. That's it. So I think it was a fun exercise, and I enjoyed doing it. But you have to really get down to past 50 when you're actually, we discussed this in just, to let you guys behind the scene. We just have this trade value series where we're doing something very similar, but we're doing it about the trading deadline, right? And so we have red light, green light, yellow light on these players, and we have to decide, how we're going to rank them, and we're ranking them based on their quality of play, like how good they are as players. So Joe Ryan is number 1, right? And that makes a lot of sense. But if the guy is a true red, like not really on the market at all, he's not going to go on our thing. And so we took guys off at the end. We're just like, what's the value of putting Dylan Cease in this? Because he's not going to get traded. So I almost feel like there should be a trade value tool of guys that could be traded. Like, can we start at 50? And then start talking about guys who could be traded? Because that's what we did in the end. The only Reds that we left on our list were guys that, so the Reds were Steven Kwan, that are still on the list. Let me see if I've got it here.
The red lights
that we left on the list: Joe Ryan, Wilyer Abreu, Steven Kwan, Ozzie Albies, and Taj Bradley. And the reason we left those on there was because Isaac Paredes did get traded last year, And so our idea was like, these are players that could actually be traded, like maybe, probably not, but maybe. But there was a last minute decision where it's like, should we take all these 5 off the list and then look through our yellow lights and create more of a red light, yellow light within the yellow light list? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because we have Emmanuel Clase as a yellow. But if we took all 5 of those red lights off, maybe we could put Clase as possibly traded, but among the possibly traded, a red light. So anyway, it's something that occurred to me looking at this. Is like, what is the real value of like talking about trade value of Shohei Ohtani.
Yeah, it goes nowhere because it's just not going to happen, right? But it's, again, I'll echo what you said before. It was a fun exercise. And speaking of fun exercises, got a glimpse behind the scene of me last night trying to figure out what really happened at my very first Major League Baseball game. So
yeah, Britt, while he's talking, try to think. Do you have any childhood memories? It doesn't have to be just baseball related, but ours were baseball related, of baseball things that you're not sure are true. So now set up.
So to fill you in, Britt, at my first baseball game, which was a doubleheader between the Tigers and Angels, I swear a woman fell out of the upper deck at Tiger Stadium, landed on the field, and was so drunk she was able to just pop up and chase one of the players. And I thought that player was Mickey Tettleton. However, further investigation has determined that there was no doubleheader played at Tiger Stadium between those teams in 1994, which was Tettleton's last year in Detroit. It was 1995, so I was a year off. The outfielder would have been Bobby Higginson. I found a game recap story from Mike DiGiovanna of the Los Angeles Times, who was there. It was so hot that day, players needed IV fluids after the game. Rex Hudler almost had heat stroke, legitimate third level heat stroke. And there's a story about him getting some fluids and then being bouncy Rex Hudler
had
again.
Heat stroke.
So it's possible that I hallucinated this, but now I know.
But none of this happened? None of this happened.
Oh, I was at the game. It was a doubleheader.
The big
the Tigers
one was
lost
when you
both
asked
games.
your dad. Your dad had no clue what you're talking about.
I asked my dad, and my dad said, I don't know. And he sent the thinking emoji. And I was waiting for my mom to just come in and be like, oh, well, you had 10 beers that day, and I drove us home, so you wouldn't remember anything. She didn't say that. My mom doesn't remember being there either. So my parents don't even remember bringing me to my first baseball game, which was a doubleheader in the heat where players were almost dying. A woman probably fell out of the stands, and somehow no one noticed it because we were all delirious because it was 94 degrees and humid in midsummer Detroit. So I am no closer to the actual answer. My brain is destroying me from the inside out.
You know
but at least
what?
I have the right year.
Sense of scale is that. So my story was that I thought that Barry Bonds hit 2 walk-off homers against the Braves in 2001. And he hit 0, but he hit some 8. He did play well against them. It just, there was no walk-off homers. And so the thing that bonds both of our stories is a sense of scale. And when you're, emotions and age can change your sense of scale. So what I'm guessing is she jumped over the wall.
The outfield wall, right, from the first level. Yeah, she kind of climbed over. She got into the space behind the outfield wall.
Something like
scaled that, fell off the top of the wall.
The scale
and then was fine.
Yeah.
And then because I was 10 years old, Tettleton, Bobby Higginson, okay. I could
and the
mix
people
that
around you
detail
didn't
up.
care about a woman running around out there because, there's fans who don't care about that. It doesn't even register.
No one had phones in their pocket that could take a picture or video, any of that stuff. So all I need now, the last thing I need to complete the story before we go, I need to reach out to Bobby Higginson. And I need to ask Bobby Higginson, Bobby, during a doubleheader in 1995 when you were with the Tigers, did a woman fall onto the field and chase you for a hug? And he'll say, no. I remember everything about that day, and that didn't happen.
The players have pretty good memories. Man.
I think you'd remember that because that's not a thing that happens every season. That'd be the thing that probably happened one time in his career. So
Britt's y'all are crazy. I don't have anything like this.
This has never happened to me. No.
Yeah, Britt's brain works better than ours. It's not destroyed. That's the answer.
I say think about it because you'll be like, oh wait, I had this one memory, and when I look up the game logs, it couldn't have been then, and it couldn't have been then.
Sunday, July
I covered
16th,
Buck Showalter,
1995.
Buck would tell you the story about Randy Johnson. We covered it in Arizona, and you'd go to write it, and you'd go upstairs, and you'd realize that not only was the Randy Johnson line off, but the game didn't exist entirely. So you thought you had this great Randy Johnson anecdote, and you'd go up to Baseball Reference and you'd be like, no, Randy wasn't even.
He never played that guy. He wasn't even in Arizona that year.
What? It wasn't he got the score wrong, or Derek, a woman fell, but no one knew from where. No.
Yeah.
It would be the entire game would be concocted. And you were like, okay, so Buck definitely feels your pain. I don't know if I have anything like that, but I know as a beat writer, we'd be in New York and he'd tell a story and people would be like, what a great story. And I'd be like, make sure you go upstairs and make sure that game happened.
Make sure that
9 times out of 10, they'd be like, you're right. The game never happened.
I think we need to have an off-season Friday night happy hour show where we have Buck on and we just talk about stuff and people decide if it actually happened or not.
Like having like a live show,
Like a live stream where Buck
voting.
tells a story.
Did this happen? Yes or no?
Yeah, and then you just get a little
Fact check.
meter going the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, the show is called Friday Fact Check. Yeah.
I wonder what he'd think of it. He might think it was funny. I don't know.
He probably would.
Yeah.
He has a good sense of humor.
I think it's completely ridiculous. But if you were at that doubleheader and you can help me corroborate my story, I'd greatly appreciate it to know that I'm not a completely insane person. That would be just great for me. We're going to go now. You don't want to follow me on Blue Sky because I'm clearly out of my mind. You can follow Britt. BrittGiroli.BScott@social. Sarris.BScott@social. I'm DVR. If you were at the game, DVR.BScott@social. Let me know. Thanks to our producer, Brian Smith, for putting this episode together. We're back with you on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening.